Think about it for a second. A superpower that defined the 20th century, an empire stretching across 11 time zones, built on a single revolutionary idea. And then, almost in the blink of an eye, it was just gone. But what if it wasn't? What if, from the ashes of the past, something new and yet deeply familiar would arise? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating hypothetical. What if the USSR actually came back?
So, to even imagine how it could come back, we gotta go back to how it all ended. Picture it, December 26, 1991. The famous Soviet flag, the hammer and sickle, is lowered over the Kremlin for the very last time. After almost 70 years, the union that was born out of the 1917 revolution, this massive centralized state built on a command economy and single-party rule, it just officially ceased to exist. Years of a stagnating economy, plus Mikhail Gorbachev's big reforms, Glasnost for more openness and perestroika for restructuring the economy, well, they kind of opened Pandora's box. Nationalist feelings that have been bottled up for decades just exploded, and the system couldn't hold itself together anymore. But look, this isn't just some historical what if. Our sources suggest there's a plausible, even if it's super complex, path to some kind of revived union. So how could this actually happen? What forces would have to come into play? And would this Union 2.0 be a carbon copy of the past, or something completely different? Let's break it down.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The whole idea of reintegration, of pulling these countries back together, it's not starting from zero. The groundwork, the institutional plumbing for a new kind of union is already in place all across the post-Soviet world. So let's look at these building blocks. First off, you've got Russia's sheer size and weight. It's got over half the population and the lion's share of the GDP of all the former Soviet republics combined. Then you've got actual institutions already running, like the Eurasian Economic Union. You can kind of think of it as Moscow's version of an EU-style bloc. It's already created a customs union and a common labor market for its members. And running underneath all of that, you still have the old Soviet legacy: integrated railways, pipelines, and factory supply chains that never really went away. And this is maybe the most important part to understand. The push for a Union 2.0 probably wouldn't be about reviving communism. No, the sources all point to something much more practical: a survival strategy. Imagine a world where Moscow is facing years of sanctions and economic pressure from the West. Suddenly, turning this regional integration from just a nice idea into an absolute necessity, well, that starts to make a lot of sense. It would be about using its economic gravity to pull its neighbors in closer, just to stay afloat. Okay, so the foundation is there, but that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? You need the political will, the popular will, to actually build something on it. And if you look inside Russia itself, it seems like there's this really powerful mix of nostalgia and very real economic anxiety pushing in that direction. I mean, just take a look at this. Surveys show that a staggering 70% of Russians regret the collapse of the Soviet Union. But here's the thing, and it's a really crucial point. For most people, this isn't about wanting to bring back communism or the breadlines. It's a deep-seated nostalgia for what they remember as a time of stability, of global respect, and social guarantees. All things they feel were completely lost in the chaos of the 90s. And this really gets to the core of it, doesn't it? It's all about perception versus reality. The memory of the Soviet era, whether it's totally accurate or not, is one of strength and stability, and that stands in such sharp contrast to the actual lived reality for so many people in the post-Soviet years, which has been one jarring economic shock after another, a sense of lost national status, and soaring inequality. Now this number, 35.1, it might not look like much, but it tells a massive story. It's Russia's Gini coefficient, which is a way economists measure income inequality. It's hit a post-Soviet high. Basically, the higher the number, the bigger the gap between the rich and the poor. And this kind of deep economic frustration, this feeling that the new system has failed ordinary people, well, that's something that could easily be used by a new leadership promising a return to national greatness and so-called Soviet-style fairness. Okay, but let's be real. Russia can't just declare a new union on its own, right? It's a two-way street. It all comes down to its neighbors, their choices, their situations, and their vulnerabilities. So what's happening on their end? I mean, just look at this. It's absolutely wild. For a country like Tajikistan, the money that migrant workers send home from Russia makes it nearly half of its entire GDP. Think about that. That creates an incredible amount of economic dependency, a powerful lever that could, in theory, be used to push a country towards closer integration. And it's not just Tajikistan. If we zoom out a bit, you can see this web of dependencies all over the place. You've got Belarus, which is super reliant on Russian energy subsidies. You've got Uzbekistan, where a huge and growing population depends on that remittance economy. But, it's not a simple story of total dominance. Look at the divergence here. Check out Kazakhstan. Its GDP per capita is now pretty much on par with Russia's. And you've got massive population growth happening across Central Asia. These are all things that are starting to shift those old power dynamics. It's getting more complicated. So what does all this really tell us? Well, despite those economic ties, you've got 30 years of these countries having their own identities, their own governments, their own elites. So a voluntary, happy return to a union, it's pretty unlikely. The sources suggest a tipping point would have to be something really drastic, like a series of synchronized crises hitting all at once. Maybe a global recession, massive political instability, or some huge security threat. Something that would make giving up some of their sovereignty for the stability of a Russian-led bloc seem like the only real option left on the table, an anchor of last resort. Okay, so let's play this out. Let's say the perfect storm hits. A crisis happens, the political will is there. What does Union 2.0 actually look like? Is it just the old USSR with a new coat of paint? Not a chance. Yeah, you can pretty much forget everything you know about the old Soviet Union. This slide really lays it out. Forget the super centralized federation with a rigid top-down economy. The new version would probably be a much looser structure. It would be built on a state capitalist model, which means, sure, there's private ownership, but the commanding heights of the economy. We're talking energy, resources, defense. Those stay firmly in the hands of the state. And ideologically, it would be a whole new ballgame. So what's the glue that holds this all together? It would be this really interesting ideological cocktail. It would cherry-pick the most popular, heroic parts of the Soviet past, like the victory in World War II, the space race, while totally ignoring all the bad stuff, like the repression and the shortages. Then you'd fuse that with a heavy dose of conservative nationalism and a strong narrative of standing up to the West. It would create a powerful, unifying story for this new bloc. All right, so if this union actually becomes a reality, how does that change the world? Because, believe me, it wouldn't happen in a bubble. It would fundamentally redraw the entire geopolitical map. So let's just trace the ripple effects here. First, you'd see a world that's even more fragmented, with this new bloc creating its own parallel economic and digital systems to kind of wall itself off. It would instantly become a massive player in global resources, controlling a huge chunk of the world's energy, grain, and minerals. And, maybe most concerningly, it would likely bring back that old, dangerous idea of militarized spheres of influence, which would put any nation caught in the middle under immense pressure. But, and this is super important, this is not a Cold War reboot. It's just not that simple. Back then, the world was basically bipolar. It was the US versus the USSR. Today, a revived union would be just one of several major powers, right alongside the US, China, and the EU. This creates a much more complex, much more crowded, and honestly, a potentially much more unstable world. And this really nails the strategy, right? While its combined economy might not be as big as the US or China, it could use its unique assets, that powerful mix of nostalgia, its incredible natural resources, and its critical locations spanning both Europe and Asia to punch way above its economic weight on the world stage. So that leaves us with this huge final question. The rise and fall of the original Soviet Union was, without a doubt, one of the defining stories of the 20th century. Now, a Union 2.0 would be a totally different animal, but its emergence would still be a world-shaking event. Could this hypothetical bloc become one of the defining stories of the 21st century? It's a future that's, well, it's not set in stone, but it's definitely something to think about.